Last week, the New South Wales government unveiled plans for a second renewable energy zone in the New England region. The Energy Minister in New South Wales, Matt Keane, claimed it could nearly match the state's entire coal-fired power capacity. Now, as with all those headlines, people gobbled them up on the ABC. But when it comes to the issue of renewables, I know, you know, the devil's in the details. So the more and more I looked into it over the weekend, well, the more questions I had, both about the stated cost of the project and its power generating capacity. Now, when we're talking energy, we all know there's no one better than the member for Hughes, Liberal MP Craig Kelly, to come on and discuss it with us. And here he is tonight. Craig, it's your mob in New South Wales. It's the Liberal government putting this in. Matt Keane, who has announced it. I'm a bit dubious that this zone, he says, will produce as much energy as all the state's coal-fired power stations combined. Lots of networks lapped up that headline. What do you think?
Well, Peter, I saw that headline on the ABC where they claimed this new 8,000 megawatts of renewable energy would equal the output of New South Wales coal-fired power stations. Now, that is just blatantly false. You have to remember, when you're talking capacity, you've got to also talk about capacity factors. So a solar farm that they say is 1,000 megawatts of capacity only works at 20% of that capacity because it doesn't work when the sun doesn't shine. Likewise, a wind farm, if they say it's 100 megawatts of capacity, it only works at about 30% of that capacity. So you've got to take those things down. You can't compare the capacity of a coal-fired power station, which can operate at its full capacity, basically on call, against the intermittent renewables that do it are weather dependent. So if you look at the numbers, about a year's worth of coal-fired generation, we get about 60,000 gigawatt hours. Now, this new renewable energy zone, if my numbers are correct, and anyone's welcome to challenge me, I think it would produce at the most about 15,000 gigawatt hours. So that's 1/4 of our coal-fired power stations. So it's just completely not true to make out that this new renewable energy will equal the output of our coal-fired power stations.
What about the cost effectiveness too? Because that was touted in the minister's announcement too, that it will be very cost efficient, and he put out numbers in terms of the capital cost of the project. But he doesn't mention all the other components beyond the 79 million that actually make it work, like connections to the grid and other things.
Well, for Peter, the last 10 years we've been hearing from these experts that have told us all this renewable energy going into the grid would make things cheaper. And they've got it wrong every single time. The more renewable energy we have had, the higher the prices have gone. And why this project would actually make prices higher is because of the cost of the transmission lines. Now, the biggest part of anyone's electricity bill, it's not actually the electricity generation, it's the cost of the poles and wires. They make up 50% or slightly more of your electricity bill. So these projects, putting all this intermittent generation capacity out in Western New South Wales, will require billions of dollars of new transmission lines, which get paid for by the electricity consumer in higher electricity prices.
I've got to ask you too about the claim that it'll be 2,000 jobs here and $13 billion of co-investment. We're talking about Chinese jobs, aren't we? Because we know with solar panels, nearly 90% of them come from China. And I also know, in relation to the numbers on wind farms, 70% of wind farms are foreign owned. So we might have them here turning intermittently with our wind, but all the profits head offshore.
That's right. Well, Peter, the latest numbers from the Parliamentary Library show that 87% of our imports of solar panels now come from China, and that's grown over the past couple of years. So if we in Australia are spending billions of dollars building a new solar farm, at least half of that flows straight out of the country into the pockets of the Chinese manufacturers over there. So yes, it will create jobs. It will create many jobs for solar panel manufacturers in China. But when it comes to Australia, once these panels are in, there's very few jobs in them. And the higher cost of electricity actually costs jobs throughout the rest of the economy, with people having less money in their pocket to spend. And plus, Peter, you've also looked at the opportunity costs of all this expenditure. It would be far, far better for us to spend money, invest this money, instead of in infrastructure that just duplicates what we've already got with generation capacity. Let's instead look at spending it on dams. Let's just look at spending it on new roads. Well, I can count many roads in my electorate alone here in southern Sydney that we need upgrading on. New bridges. That's where the money should be spent, instead of sort of this woke virtue signalling on things that are only going to make electricity more expensive.
Well, we're going to rely on you because he's one of your brethren in New South Wales, albeit he's in the state parliament, you're in the federal parliament. And perhaps next time you run into Matt Keane, you might tell him to have some truth in advertising with some of the spin that came out with that announcement. Because I think, as I say, the devil is in the detail when it comes to renewables. But thank goodness we've got you. Craig Kelly, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Peter.